right, welcome everyone to the Victoria Advocate Newsmaker discussion with Congressman Michael Cloud.
Good morning.
I'm editor and publisher Chris Cobbler, and we want to just tell Michael first that we very much appreciate you making time out of your busy schedule when you're back in the district to come talk with our readers and our online audience. We took some questions in advance, letting people know that you're coming, so compiled them by email and calls, and right off the top, we'll just jump right into it because there's a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot going on since you've been in office now 13 months.
It's right about 13, 14 months.
Yeah. Time flies.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you here last time. Had a good conversation. Thought we'd start with closer to home, Hurricane Harvey recovery. You talked a little bit briefly, but I thought we could talk a little bit about, I know you're concerned about just making sure the Harvey recovery money gets to the right place, and with FEMA reform, maybe just talk a little briefly about what your office is working on in that regard.
Yeah, anyone who's been involved with hurricane relief knows it's a multi-year process. It's a long-term process. We've made a lot of progress in 2 years, in large part just to the spirit of our community, people working together to get things done. Right off the bat, we realized it was going to be a big part of what we worked on as an office, and so we hired a staffer to just focus just on hurricane recovery, in addition to the normal case workload that we have. So made that a priority, do our best to be in every meeting that happens across the community that we can, that we know of, and so that we're working with community entities through the recovery process, trying to help individuals through their recovery process. It's anybody who had to deal with FEMA or all the other entities involved, it becomes this alphabet soup to people who are trying to recover, trying to rebuild their home, trying to get their workplace back in working as well. And so we've been involved in that process. We've kind of had a two-prong approach. One is helping people through the current process, meanwhile using the conversations we have and to glean information to reform the process over the long haul. And so had some success being able to kind of grease the bureaucratic wheels in getting grants through, and at the same time informing the process. We've met with FEMA administration a number of times to talk about things like how we can improve the system. One of the biggest deals is homelessness that still remains. But one of the difficult things has been the federal government has some of the information that local entities can't use to help. They would have the means, they would have the resources to be able to do something about it if they had the information. And so looking ahead to the next time, what can we do to make that information available? We can have a central point of data, a central point of contact, looking at longevity of FEMA staff so that the turnover, there's been a number of times people get halfway through a process and then you have a new staff member and it's like starting over again. So all those different kind of processes.
We did a lot of reporting on the days and months after Harvey about that very fact that the federal information didn't come to the local level, and there was this big disconnect, and FEMA turnover was significant. So we did a lot. There's a lot of frustration around that. So I hear what
it's
you're
been
saying.
a big deal, and one thing too that we've tried to have as part of the conversation is just a matter of scale. In the sense, especially rural counties, smaller communities don't have the same bandwidth, don't have the staff, don't have the team of lawyers to send to Washington to lobby for the formulas to be bent in their favor, in a sense, as well as you'll have communities who are dealing with grants that have to do with tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to millions, but they go through the same 32 approval touch points, for example, as a multi-million-dollar grant. And so looking at what we can do to kind of streamline that process, one of the things, you're supposed to get 3 contractors. Some of these smaller communities, there's just not 3 businesses available, it's just, so we understand that we want to have a process that does protect from waste, fraud, and abuse, but at the same time, we don't want to build a system that has waste, fraud, and abuse in it, and that's a little more practical and pragmatic.
Right. Well, that's important, close to home. A bunch of the questions we got, of course, focused on what's dominating the headlines, the impeachment process, so we got a sort of a series of questions about that. Starting with, do you think just the divisiveness in Congress right now is going to derail your legislative agenda, anybody's legislative agenda? Is that going to just dominate what's going on for now?
Unfortunately, it's the whole investigative aura, I guess, in Congress is taking up way way more bandwidth than it should. You know, most of us campaigned on the things that we wanted to do, you know, the things that are important to people in our district. Oddly enough, when I've traveled, I've expected more questions on impeachment and really haven't gotten that many when I travel, just because people are more concerned about going to work, a good economy, you know, protecting our country's border, recovering from the hurricane, all those kind of things. That's not to say it's not important. It certainly is, and we'll be involved with that. I'm on the oversight committee, so we'll definitely end up involved in that discussion. But at the same time, you know, wish we could be spending more time fixing the border, working on immigration process, working on infrastructure, working on the great transition we're making from energy dependent nation to an energy dominant nation, all those kind of things. And so, you know, it's kind of sad that that's where it is. We're ever hopeful in our office and do our best to continue to working, to continue to have productive conversations, to try to build bridges without compromising values and those kind of things. So always working, but it's definitely makes the environment challenging as far as getting stuff done.
Right. Do you think the House's impeachment inquiry is being handled appropriately, or how could it be handled better?
Well, you have to take the term impeachment inquiry first of all, in that was a term that the speaker threw out, Nancy Pelosi,
right.
But it didn't really change what's been going on. There's no official process that we're suddenly in that we weren't in before. There's been this investigative aspect to almost every committee that there is. I've sat in committees that had to do with carcinogens and cosmetics that somehow turned into an investigative thing. It's just been kind of crazy. But the process definitely needs to, it's been very lopsided. If you looked in the past, it's been bipartisan all along, and there's been a vote to start the process. We're not seeing that. For example, just last week there was a hearing with Volker, and we're not seeing the transcript released from that hearing, mainly because it countered the narrative for impeachment. And so because it didn't go like the committee leadership wanted it to go, we're seeing that transcript withheld, and certain little snippets of it released. And so the process is being managed very much from a one side as opposed to having this open process. And I don't think that there was an expectation that the president was just going to release the transcript. So there's talks about whistleblowers, and they're saying, well, we have a lot of whistleblowers. Well, all the whistleblowers just point to this transcript. So we have the transcript, and so that's really where the burden of proof in this discussion should be.
Right. Well, and certainly hear what you're saying about the process, and process being partisan. What do you think at the core of the issue in terms of President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky, and whether that was appropriate, that core of that transcript that we've heard, or summarized transcript?
Yeah, well, if you look through the transcript, you have the president call. He congratulates. The other president is the one who starts the conversation. It's like, just like you, we're trying to drain the swamp here. We need help fighting corruption. And so he's like, can you help us with that? And so the president says, well, here's a couple places to start. We've been hearing conversations about this. This has been going on in the Ukraine. You might want to look into that. For me, when I read through it, I tried to, everybody tries to hyper-politicize everything. So I tried to read through, let's take all that out. Let's pretend this is just any other president. Let's pretend this is any other individual who's been involved in what's been accused here. Is there probable cause for a president to investigate this? He's the chief law enforcement officer in the country. And for me, when I read through that, the president's doing his job in a sense. He was elected very much to drain the swamp, so to speak, to investigate these kind of things. And so if there was no probable cause, and the president just called with some obscure, can you dig up dirt, there would be concern there. But we have the other president saying, we're trying to weed out corruption in our country, how can you help us? And so the president, with the information that we have available so far, was within his jurisdiction. Right.
Well, that's been thrown around and talked about, this quid pro quo, And one way of asking the question, I guess, is whether by asking a foreign government to open an investigation of a political opponent in exchange for a White House visit and possibly security funds, do you think that's an abuse of the office of the president? Or
Well, the question goes to why was
Right.
it be
yeah,
was where are we investigating because they're a political opponent? Or are we just trying to dig up dirt? As been, I mean, we just got out of a 2 to 3 year investigation that's was laden with missteps along the way, and that's putting it very mildly. You could probably take that, and there's an investigation into the investigation. I think we're going to see the results of that soon. But there were missteps along the way. At least there were missteps along the way, and so it seems okay for one side to investigate for political reasons, but then you have someone else who has probable cause of criminality being investigated. So you have to ask is the president supposed to not deal with the enforcement aspect of it, even though it's his job, just because it's a political opponent? You know, you should be blind to those kind of things. And so, you know, again, the president's doing his job with the information that we have available at this point.
okay. What about afterwards of the discussion, President Trump requesting China to investigate Hunter Biden or the Bidens? I mean, do you think that's appropriate to do?
The thing here is, if we had an investigation that was going on, we've seen the investigative wing of our government have major missteps, and then you have and I hate to do this because I'm you know me, I'm not like this. We have a national media who's kind of been a little complicit in this investigation aspect, a little one-sided in it, and so, you know, the president, I think he brainstorms.
Right.
You know, everybody or a lot of people take what he says as, you know, thought out policy.
Right.
I think in that moment he's probably just talking. You know,
Right,
I mean,
right.
You know.
And I would add that too. I mean, I would say that you and I have had a long relationship, and I appreciate very much how you deal with the local media, and I think it's a whole different animal than what we're talking about at the national media level, and I appreciate that very much. I just want to put that out there. You've always been really frank and helpful, and the fact that you're sitting down here with us now, I think, is evidence of that.
Well.
So appreciate that.
Sure.
Just one last, because people did. I know that you haven't heard a lot, but I've heard a lot of questions. But one last question along those regards is, as President Trump's, a lot of discussion gets around President Trump's language and the language around the whistleblower. That's one of the questions people had. Do you think has that been appropriate? Do you think the original whistleblower acted in good faith? I mean, how would you characterize what you know of that whistleblower? Yeah.
We know so little about it, and I try to base my opinions on the information that's available. There's very little information available. I do know that there is, just from a number of interactions on a number of different fronts, it is true that there's an element in the administration that's not being cooperative with the president and potentially is actively working against his agenda. I don't know if this whistleblower's, we don't know who it is, we don't know. You know, it'd be helpful. I can appreciate the need to protect the identity, but at the same time, we should be able to know information about them in order to weigh motive, you know, as we continue to move forward.
Right.
And so, I don't follow every tweet, so there's I don't even have Twitter on my phone. So
you don't tweet that much, honestly.
well,
Which is, I'm not criticizing that.
You know, and maybe that's a criticism. I don't know. There's only so much bandwidth, and you know, what motivated me to get into this was the policy aspects of it. So I can't speak to every single tweet. I will say, you know, this president, probably different than others, kind of brainstorms in public in a sense, and so you'll see a lot of times where he throws out an idea, but he's actually still in the feedback process, and sometimes that's actually how he's starting his feedback loop process. He'll throw out an idea where he has a general idea of where he wants to go, then he kind of weighs the feedback. That's actually kind of a good process, you know, from a business perspective, but people aren't used to seeing that from the presidency, and so I think it throws people for a loop.
Right. Well, let's wrap up. We respect your time closer to home. I know you've been working a lot of border issues, and you were just back visiting the border, and maybe fill in our folks on the latest of what you've been doing and what you've been seeing there.
Sure. We, about a month ago, were down there for our third official visit to the border. Of course, I've been across the border dozens of times, but in an official capacity to sit there and get the intel briefing, to visit the facilities. You know, from the beginning, when I arrived at Congress, you had Democrats blaming Republicans, Republicans blaming Democrats, and I tried to bring a different viewpoint to this. Say, look, Republicans aren't the villain, Democrats aren't the villain. The villain is the cartels.
Right.
Can we all agree on that at least?
Right.
If we can agree on the bad guys, maybe we can start to have some
Right.
constructive discussion on how to fix the problem. And so you have cartels who have us outmanned, outfunded along the border. Of our men and women in uniform who's supposed to be on the front line, roughly 40 to 50% of them are essentially doing paperwork as opposed to manning their posts. Now, cartels know this, and they're intentionally taxing our resources at the border to keep enforcement down. And so who knows what's happening when it comes to drug and human trafficking that's coming through. I've been to the facilities. I've seen the young women who 40% of them, and that's expected to believe a conservative estimate, have been sexually assaulted on the journey. I've seen the videos of a dad in a stash house who's been stripped down and beaten after paying his fee at every stage along the journey to get to the border, being held for ransom once again for his family to pay. It's tragic that we've allowed our good heart as a nation, our welcoming spirit to let cartels take advantage of that. And the thing that I've tried to frame this as is, look, cartels are the bad guys. They're having an outsized influence in our communities, in what's going on. Our law enforcement in our community talks about the fatal fun all the time. I'm sure you heard Sheriff O'Connor talk about it all the time.
We did a big multi-part series on the fatal fun.
Right. Yes. So we've brought that message to Congress in a number of different committees and a number of different forums to show that this is having a real impact. But they're also taking advantage of the migrants who are making this journey. They actually go out and recruit people for this journey. Many of them are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to make the journey. You know, and as one person said, you know, we're paying for it. Sometimes they're paying for it with their bodies. You know, and that's what's so tragic about it. But they're also having an outsized influence in Central and South America. The cartels have their influence in legitimate business and government, and are serving as a destabilizing force in these developing countries. So, you know, I'm happy to see that other countries like Guatemala and Mexico are coming on board and realizing who the real enemy is. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of progress over the last several months. Still a lot of work to be done. It's still remains in a crisis situation, even with the progress that we've made. We're still, you know, we're down, I guess, 30% of where we were roughly just a few months ago, but we're still 30% higher than we were a year ago in dealing with the situation. And so it's a lot of progress, but a lot of work that needs to be done. And we have been involved in those discussions, part because of being from South Texas, and been invited into a number of those discussions, including got to meet with the president in the Oval Office about it.
Right.
Sit across the desk just like this and talk about what's going on in the border. And so a lot of work being done.
And a lot of work to do yet.
And much more left to do, that's for sure.
But just to wrap up, anything I haven't asked? I mean, you've done a lot. You've got a lot of topics to cover, but I just want to throw it out to you if you've got anything else you want to tell our viewers.
Trade is one that's really important to our district, whether you're in the energy sector, whether you're in the agriculture sector, or any sector in between. That's a huge part of our district. We're a net export district, and so we're working to see those trade deals passed. We're in a situation where trade war is no fun, but China they do not have our best interest in mind. They do not have the interest of the world in mind, and so it's one of those where a trade war now is better than a collateral war later. So we're seeing progress. Of course, everybody like it to go quicker. USMCA was looking really positive up till 2 weeks ago for passage this year. We'll see when we're back there next week where that is. I'm hoping people can kind of silo their efforts in a sense, and then we can come together and see some good trade deals.
Because the USMCA looked like it had bipartisan support until recently. It looked like-
Bipartisan support had been
Yeah.
growing,
Yeah.
and the speaker had been really kind of waiting for
Right.
to flesh out a little more bipartisan support before she felt comfortable putting it on the floor. We've had the votes to pass it for quite a while, but it would have been a party line vote. Of course, the speaker wants to make sure it's a bipartisan vote, or
Right.
something like that's going to get done, and so they're making a lot of headway in getting that done. But we'll see. We'll see. We're
Stay
working
tuned.
on it. Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
All right, well, again, really appreciate you coming by, and appreciate everybody emailing and calling questions. This will be posted, recording at victoriaadvocate.com, so if you miss it on Facebook Live, you'll see it there. And again, thanks so much for tuning in. Our conversation with Congressman Michael Cloud, and I'm editor and publisher Chris Cobbler. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian.